of the Jefferson Elementary School District for April 12th, 2022. May I please get members present?
Ms. Manufa Lienga Anoa'i is absent. Ms. Marie Brizuela is absent. Ms. Andrea Jordan.
Here.
Mr. Shakil Ali.
Here.
Mr. Clayton Koo.
Here. Next is the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Vidalis, could you lead us in the pledge?
Sure, please stand. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda.
I'll move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
First and second, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That was unanimous. Next is number 5, persons wishing to address the board. Are there any speakers?
We do not have speakers today.
Okay. Seeing none, next is item 6A, Equity Network Study Session. Governance team will reflect on effective governance practices and build deeper content awareness of educational equity leadership through application and monitoring of policy. I will pass it over to our presenters tonight.
Sure. Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see you again. We blinked and here we are. We're at session 2 of 4 for the year. So just super excited to be joined by my amazing colleague, Deborah Keys, right, who you've met only virtually, right? And so it's just good to have her here back in California. We try to get her out here at least once a month and just do a board member tour.
Just a reminder,
it working?
with the masks, we have to speak closer to the microphone, so.
How about that? Is that better?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Should I repeat back
No,
up and
that's
start
fine.
over? Okay.
It's just so the video can
Yeah,
capture
sure.
the sound. Thanks.
So again, just thankful to have Deborah here to walk us through our next portion of our book study. We're still continuously our focus on effective governance. And of course, all of this is in efforts to support your equity leadership journey. And we know your role as a governance team, as policymakers, is so important to have that governance structure in place so that your equity work that you do take on can last, right? And last at that policy level through the direction and guidance that you give across the district. So super excited to be here. I'm not going to take too much time because I know we're going to try to end today at 9 o'clock so that we can be able to stay on our original schedule, which the agendas said two different things, but we're here and we're gonna make it work. We miss your 2 colleagues, by the way, so we'll give them a hard time and reach out to them. And as you know, I think last time you weren't here, Andrea, right? So I think we volunteered you for a bunch of stuff, right? Okay, no, but it's good to have you all here. So, what I'm going to do for the sake of time is pass it to Deborah, and just always appreciate you all staying engaged in this work and always being open to the discomfort that comes with growing and learning together. Just want to acknowledge that as a board, like a lot of boards aren't doing this work. This is a public space, right? So it's sometimes hard to do like our own internal work in front of everybody. But I just want to acknowledge that, and sometimes the discomfort of growing and just unpacking like what are the things we're working on. It's pretty powerful to be in the space with you to do this because every board is not working in the same way that you are. So with that, we are going to jump into our book study work first, and then afterwards we'll spend some time revisiting your equity statement and your equity policy so we can talk about next steps and how to take those 2 and start to apply those and looking at next steps. Okay, so we're going to do the book study first. And so I'll pass the physical mic finally to Deborah so that we can get started on that. And then I'll come back and facilitate the last portion. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Well, good. It is great to see you guys in person. It's almost like want to give a group hug or something. You know, can't touch each other as much. Yes, we did. We did. So I'm so glad to be here with you. And so I see you have your workbook, so that's awesome. So what I want to do is, before we talk about chapter 3 and only a little bit about 4 because it's about new board member. And as Shaquille, I found out later that I'm not a new board member. I've done this before, and I appreciate that. So we don't have to talk too much about new board members. It's just really just a reminder, if you get new board members, that there's something that the team should do, just onboarding and things of that nature. But I just want to kind of go over chapters 1 and 2, just to quickly go over that, and you have some homework to do. And so the chapter 1 talked a lot about that moral imperative. If you read that, that's what it kept repeating. So just give me an idea, what were your thoughts? What is it really trying to say to you when we're talking about governance, and it's talking about the moral imperative that board members should have? What resonated the most with you when it kept mentioning that throughout chapter 1?
Well, for me, I think it was just the commitment to focusing on, again, our students, and focusing on the work that we came here to do, and not steering away from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Shaquille? Anything to add to that?
I honestly, I felt like it was a little vague when it kept mentioning the moral imperative, and I focused more on the unity of purpose.
There you
because
go.
it kept mentioning those two things together. And our board has done a lot of work on unity of purpose. I've actually, I think 2 or 3 times gone through that process I know I've done it with, these 2 board members, but also the other board members more than once. So I think that's what resonated with me was just having that unity of purpose to drive what we're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What about you, Clayton?
I think for me, I know there's a section about sort of governing with a governance mindset in place, making sure that the decisions that we make have that as a top priority, on top of unit purpose, on top of other things that sort of we should always be thinking about, especially when it comes down to school decisions, curriculum decisions, just decisions across the board. Just making sure that that's always on the back of our mind, regardless of other things that might come up along the way.
And you're all 3 of you are right. And you think about moral imperative is what drives you to do what you're doing, and it's asking yourself that question, why am I doing this work? And I know am I making the decisions for our students, or am I making decisions because of adults? But if you always keep in mind that the students, they are the ones that should be the nucleus of what you're focusing on every time. So just that reminder to say, I'm doing this work when you have to make those very tough decisions, that's the moral imperative. What about you, Bernie? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think with the moral imperative, certainly it's each one of us has our own sort of fire in our belly or purpose behind why we do the work that we do. But what I found helpful when we've had these conversations in the past is to find the commonalities among each of us. And I think as Ms. Jordan mentioned, remembering that it's all about the kids, and we're here to improve outcomes and experiences for our students. And we all come to the table with that imperative because we believe that education can and should make a difference in outcomes. And I think that's how I connected to the piece around moral imperative.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's that individual thing before you can even get to that unity of purpose, because you're taking it to the next step, because you're working as a governing team. So that's what the next step that you get to. So what about chapter 2, just about trustees' governance mindset? Talking about, being very intentional about the work, those systems thinking, the manner in which you actually govern, your strategic focus, and then that deep learning. Out of just those 4, any particular one resonate the most with you?
I think for me, one of that was I think the deep learning, try and make sure that even as trustees, we might think we know everything, but there's still a lot we can learn, whether it's actually talking to school staff or administrators, or just trying to talk to teachers and parents and families, just knowing what is happening at school sites, how it's affecting their students, And I think just making sure that we use all of that to sort of be a more informed, but also I think a better decision maker when it comes down to school policies and school issues that will come to us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that taking that deeper dive, that not only that you read your board packets and all the supporting documentation there, but you can also do your own research. And there's information out there that not necessarily you have to wait for your superintendent and staff to give you the information, but just continuous learning is what board members should be doing. Just like the superintendent, teachers, and principals get their professional learning. You know, there is no requirement, if you will, for board members that you have to do it, but it's a good thing that the board members that you guys have done decided that you want professional learning and to set aside that time to do that. And so that helps you in that deep learning space where you're trying to get as much information as you can to make your informed decisions, right? So what other areas that really resonated with you?
Well, I had all of the areas. There's two that stood out for me. So systems thinking for me, I thought was really important, mostly because the ability to see the interdependencies and looking at it from a higher level and really seeing like, how will this decision impact other things and not just thinking like solely focusing on the decision you're making, truly understanding the impact that it's going to make. And then the second one, so your manners, your body language. And I saw the chart on, it's like, well, a lot of your verbal, it's important, but body language is actually the higher percentage of, and you're in a board meeting and maybe you don't agree with some of the things that are being talked about, but you have to, how will I put this? Make sure that you're putting out a positive body language to ensure that it doesn't come off negative, even if you don't disagree, because again, we are a team and we should be, I would say kind of like a group thought. And if I'm behaving a certain way, then it could be reflected on my other board members as well. So.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because even all the time, the year or two that we had to be virtual and we didn't have masks. And so, but it's still that body language, you're saying a lot. And I would have to remind board members, your mic is on. I can hear you breathing hard. I can see when someone's talking, just how you either, tension or you're looking away or things of that nature. And even now with the mask, your eyes tell a lot. And so we still have to be very careful. When someone's talking and you're listening, you usually bring your body in to them. But when you're not, your body language is key because that can end a conversation right there. And that's never what you want to do because this is your space to have discussion. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
I think that this board over the years has had the conversation around manner more around we don't have to be friends. It's nice when we are. It's nice when we can enjoy each other's company, but that's not our requirement. Our requirement is that we treat each other with respect. We listen to one another. We consider each other's perspectives, and we make decisions jointly, and we abide by that decision, whether or not we agree with it. And so that's been the focus of the conversations that we've had over the last few years. Because sometimes people feel like we need to get along, we need to be friends, but it doesn't always happen, especially in elected positions. Like, we don't choose each other. The only people you choose is me, and none of you chose me. I was here before you. So I think that's important to remember, that regardless of why we're here, so we treat each other respectfully by listening and considering each other.
Yeah, and we know the last 2 years, civility was kind of thrown out the window. And so you have to be very intentional in making sure that what are you modeling? I always like to remind board members, you guys are the leaders. Students are watching you. That's the most important thing. So what are you modeling, the type of behavior? Because we have expectations for our students, but they're looking at the adults. And so it has been a challenging last couple of years of how people have just, I just don't know what happened. It's just, like I said, civility was thrown out the window. We just felt that we could treat each other any kind of way. But regardless of what occurred over the last 2 years, I remind board members, your job did not change just because we went through a pandemic. The superintendent is still responsible to ensuring that it is a safe learning environment, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a fire or anything else. And so governing should have never stopped. We had to add the other layers that we had to deal with, but the governing should have never stopped, and it did get derailed. And I think we learned a lot, hopefully the lessons learned. And because the superintendent, like I said, regardless, is responsible for making sure it's a safe learning environment. So it's just, hopefully we're prepared for when something else happens, because it will be something else. We just don't know what it is, right? But we'll be prepared, right? What about you, Clayton? What are your thoughts? Any particular one?
Not anything extra at the moment.
Okay. Shaquille?
Yeah, I enjoy reading about the global competencies for learning, the 6 C's.
Yes.
That has a lot to do with actually teaching 21st century learning skills. I think all of them are actually part of that, except for character. I don't believe is or citizenship, but definitely collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking are some of the concepts that we use with the students. And so it was good for me to see those and then put that into the perspective of governance.
And I hear people say, well, add another C to that, and it's celebration. Because you have to add that. And these C's are something that a lot of them superintendents will use with their administrators to kind of go through these competencies. It will be a great exercise to go through as well. And so, any other thoughts? I do want to kind of see which of your, on page 12 of your workbook, you were going to kind of select any 2 of those, or at least you could just give me one of those quotes that really resonated the most with you, and share your rationale, because it's really covering the topic in the book that you read. You see that on page 12?
I chose the last 2 quotes.
Okay.
As systems thinkers, trustees must not just think strategically as they lead their local districts, but must look up and join with colleagues and superintendents to influence the policies that have such a major impact on their programs. And my short rationale is, in order to handle big projects, systems are essential. The mastermind principle is helpful. So just knowing that, one person in isolation will not be able to handle all the major problems, having a good crew of people you can have discourse with helps. And then the second quote was, to be effective, trustees and superintendents must develop a governance mindset, a shared moral imperative, and unity of purpose, utilizing sound principles and practices, the keys to effective governance. And I just said, as once again, our board works to clarify our unity of purpose periodically.
Okay, that is awesome. I love both of those quotes, and your rationale is spot on. And working as a team, you're demonstrating that. Who else want to share their? Go ahead, Andrea.
So I also chose the second to the last one, and then so I'll just read my rationale since he read the whole thing. So working together is imperative to ensure success. Learning from others, other trustees, even other school boards and other superintendents, to allow us to see different perspectives and how they may have dealt with certain situations to help us probably move forward our own systems and our own policies. And then the other one that I chose was a shared moral imperative, a relentless commitment to the learning of all students, no exceptions, must drive the work of the board and its individual and collective action. And my rationale was that our commitment to the success and learning of our students is the only reason we are here. Without the students, there are no teachers, there is no administration or a board.
Absolutely. Spot on there. And that's why, again, focusing on the students. We do need the adults. We're not saying that we don't value the adults. hard stop there. I'm not even gonna say but, or we know that the students, they're really your constituents. I always want to remind board members of that. They are just not old enough to vote for you. But really, those are the ones who are relying on you to make the best decisions for them. And so always staying focused. And that will help even with what Bernie said, that perhaps you don't agree with each other, but what can we agree on that's going to be best for our students? That's how you have to get to that consensus and understanding. So it's not about, I didn't get my way, you got your way, because it's really not about the adults. It's about what's best for our students based upon the information that we have. We're not going to be emotional about it. You know, we live in that space a little bit, but it tugs at your heart. But we have to make decisions based upon data, on facts, all types of data, not just one data source. So that's what we have to work to get to that level. What about you, Clayton? I see you have something written.
Yeah, I do. I do.
A lot, I see.
I wish it was that much. I picked the second and the fourth one, actually. Second one, governance is not just passing policies, it is what boards and superintendents do together and how they do it. I think for me, my rationale was sort of understand that sort of creating a governance framework isn't just like a basic function of the org, but it's also more like the integral part of what we're trying to accomplish together. Because you could just pass policies here and there, but there's a lot more than just passing a board bylaws here, bylaw there, but there's a lot more to sort of why there is rationale behind it. And then for me, I picked number 4, which is the starting place for developing unity of purpose is around a central moral imperative from which programs and policies for the district flow. If there is disagreement among the board around its central point, then developing a unity of purpose on the board is almost impossible. I think we've all talked about the importance of unity of purpose, sort of keeping a clear vision, whether there might be personal disagreements on stuff. At the end of the day, I think it's just ensuring that as a board, we are moving in one direction. Whether I may agree on this or that, if the board is majority or in general sort of support one direction or one approach, we should sort of move in that direction as well.
Absolutely. And if, you know, if board members just remember that, again, why you're doing this work and you're getting to the, you know, the unity of purpose where the board, superintendent, everyone's working in a cohesive way, collaborative way for the good of the district. And so whether you agree or not, but it's the discussion that is so important because all of you bring your unique talents to the table. You have different lived experiences. And so you may bring a whole nother perspective than your colleagues. So it's a matter of putting everything on the table and so that it can be discussed. I always like to just say, just don't climb on the table with it because once you do, you're holding on to it and you won't listen to anyone else. And so just remember that everyone is here. They have a space, they have a voice, and you all want to hear everyone's perspective because if you have more experience in some area, I will listen more to you because I can read about it, but I don't have a lived experience. And that's that team effort and working in a cohesive way where you're respecting everything that your individual colleagues are bringing to the table. That's what a governance team looks like in action. What about you, Bernie?
So one of the quotes was the third quote, the one around the shared moral imperative. And the rationale, or what I focused on, was the commitment, the board's commitment to the learning of all students. Thinking about the definition and the expansion of learning, like it's not just the 3 R's, but there's so much that we are committed to wanting our students to learn and grow in, and having the board have those conversations around what those are besides in addition to the state standards. And we know we've started to do that with our conversations around ethnic studies, with some of our conversations around social emotional learning, and citizenship qualities, and those conversations that is part of learning. And of course, those learning items come with their own sets of data that we can pull from and examine to see how the learning is taking place. And I also chose the last one, around the governance mindset and the shared moral imperative. And that just connects with my first comment about we each have our own moral imperative, but we need to find the commonality among all of our moral imperatives to find one that's shared among us.
Absolutely. And again, that's something that you work at. You're a team, and you continuously work at that, and support each other in that space. There's this one, and I think everyone had a chance to share in that page. Look on page 34 at the top. When it's under systems thinking, you remember this story about the helicopter? When there's a fire. Remember that story? And it really talks about the strategies necessary to, a person was kind of looking at the fire, and it's like, do you go and put fires out when something occurs, or does the board stay and have that view from the balcony to see where the fires are? But when you're on the ground level, like where the superintendent and his staff are, they're putting out the fires this way. Now, if the board doesn't have enough patience, you will want to take the fire hose and put the fire out yourself. And so it just reminds you of having that helicopter view, so that you get your perspective is different than the superintendent and his staff. So the board members, you will hear people say, when you're talking about governance, the balcony view, the 10,000-foot view, it's a reason that the governance structure is this way, so that you have a bigger picture of what it looks like. Every time I fly in, I can say, okay, when they say we're at 10,000 feet, and I look out, I'm like, you can really see the structure. You can see the little matchbox cars driving. You can see every angle, but you can also see if there's going to be a collision. And that's that view for the board where, that governance line, that dotted line where you'll come in and inform the superintendent when you see something, if you hear something in the community. But just this thing about the fire where the board member perhaps want to just take it and put the fire out because they're too anxious, but the superintendent knows that there's something else going on that the board may not be aware of. So just working together is so important, and the board working at that macro level at all times and not the micro level. So your other part of your homework was to, let's see, page 29, 8 and 29 in your big workbook. And I'm going to go through, we're not going to go through all three of them, but we were going to summarize, it was talking about the 4 elements of a governance mindset, which is that systems thinking, strategic focus, deep learning, and manner. So since I have the 3 of you here, and Bernie, I'm going to still pull you in. Shaquille, can you tell me the what of any one of those 4? The top one. If you say summarize the main ideas, you can use either one of those 4. And Andrea, if you could do the so what. And then Clayton, if you can do the now what of either one of those 4. Okay? Whatever one you want to select. These are the 4 areas that are the governance mindset. The 4 elements of governance mindset. Go ahead, Shaquille.
Main ideas of system thinking, as I mentioned before, that we're dealing with serious issues, and you need more than your own brain to help solve these problems. So having other people to bounce ideas off of is part of system thinking. Then also looking at the big picture and making sure that the actions that you take are going to be the most beneficial for the system as a whole. I think those are the main ideas about system thinking.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Thank you. Absolutely spot on there. What about you, Andrea?
So for the implications of each of the sections of the governance mindset, I'll choose strategic focus. And so for me, it was, do the job of the trustee and not the job of those that the district has hired, and really trying to focus on remaining at that 10,000-foot level. Because obviously, if we interfere when we become more administrative and less governing, we're not focusing on the right job, and we need to leave that to the superintendent and his staff. So
Absolutely. Thank you for that. What about you, Clayton? Your thoughts?
I think I said this one earlier, but it's also like deep learning, sort of understanding how we can apply that to our everyday work. There's a bunch of issues that we come across every day, and just even doing our simple, basic homework in advance, reading as much as we possible, especially when it comes down to like new board bylaws that come across the board, asking questions from Bernie and other people if we have questions, and just making sure that we have a deeper understanding and learning of what's being discussed so that we can actually make a better and more informed decision.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. What about you, Bernie? What are your thoughts? You can select anyone you want to share information on.
No, I'm just reflecting on the thoughts around systems thinking and even that helicopter imagery, how the helicopter pilot or those who are in the helicopter are informed largely from what they see from their perspective, but also they need to get information from on the ground.
Yeah.
They need to say, hey, this is happening over here. We're dealing with this. We see a wind coming up and it's going to blow the fire the other direction. What's on the other side of the mountain where the fire is going to go, and I think sometimes school boards and superintendents, we often get the frontline people telling us what to do from their perspective. Like, this bush is on fire and I need like 10 gallons of water right here, right now. Otherwise, the prize rose bush is going to burn away, and I'll, get everyone over here right now. And those are the kinds of calls we get and the kinds of emails that we get. But we need to remember that we have to look at it from the system's perspective, and what are the unintended consequences of sending 2 fire trucks to that one rose bush that's on fire, even if it was grandma's favorite. Diverting resources from the bigger picture for something very important. Not that it's not important, but diverting the resources and sending them to one specific thing that frontline people are yelling about takes away from, the fire approaching a school building, if that's, you're going to use the analogy there. So for me, that's what I always have to remember, is that it's not always the loudest voices that I need to pay attention to, but need to look at the bigger picture and consider and ask, like Shaquille said, ask, colleagues, what are the unintended consequences if we act in this way? What are we saying no to because we say yes to this?
And for a person who doesn't live in California, you guys can talk about fires in such an eloquent way of how, when I think about, so when I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, looking, and I'm like, how are they putting out these fires? And they're in the middle of it. They're digging trenches around. I'm like, why don't they just run? But they know what they're doing. Again, they're trying to protect. There are some things that need to burn, but there are some things you need to protect as well. So you got to think about that. And those individuals are the experts who are on the ground. And you have the superintendent and his staff who are the experts. And of course, board members are just saying, superintendent, what's your plan? We know it's burning over here. We know this is happening. What's your plan to address it? And then you give him the tools he needs to be successful. And then that's where that whole accountability and all of this is connected to the work you do through the lens with equity in place. You will hear stories from community members or other stakeholders about what they know is going on, but do always know that there's a lot more than any that they know or that perhaps you guys know. I always like to remind board members, I hope you realize that there are some things that are happening day to day that you don't even know about, but that's okay. Because that's why you have the superintendent who has octopus arms. He is supposed to put out those fires. Right, right. He is supposed to handle those things, but he would know that if it's going to be an issue and it will bubble up to the Board of Education, he knows to inform you. And it could be just a matter of saying, there may be a lot of people coming to our board meeting complaining about this or whatever. Know that I'm handling it. There's some things that are going on, and then you just have to trust that he's doing that. And then, but that's what it looks like, because there's no way you would want to know or would even have the capacity or want to hear all of everything that's going on. It's not necessary. You just make sure that things are in place so that he has the support to do what he needs to do. Okay.
Great sound effect, by the way.
I didn't know what that was, but
No, we're right across the street from a fire
Right,
station.
you didn't hear it? Yeah.
I did. Remember, and I was telling you we're across the street from a fire. She made it sound like I was at the wrong place. I said, there is a fire department right across the street. Anyway.
Great timing, the sound
She's only
effect.
been here in the dark, that's why she can.
Right.
Okay, because I said, and did I get dropped off at the wrong place? But so those were the first two chapters, and really just kind of wanted to hear from you. And I'm hoping that you're enjoying this book, that it will become a tool for you. You'll keep it. It'll start looking like this eventually. You will always refer back to it. So I want to get to chapter 3. And Shaquille, you mentioned at the very beginning about that unity of purpose, and that's how I was going to start this out, that the vision is of a governance system, school board and superintendent working together as that unifying team with a common vision driven by a shared moral imperative. So when things get tough, this is what you remember. You go back to this. We're here for the same reason, for all of our students. And so I always like this part. You see that empty chair? Because what is chapter 3? What is chapter 3 about, superintendent? You remember?
Governance, sitting in the hot seat.
Yeah, how about that? So this is going to be fun. He's on the hot seat here. So based upon what you guys read in chapter 3, what kind of superintendent do you have here? And here are the typical governance styles that the book talked about the superintendents have. And based upon how you know your superintendent, which one will you say your superintendent is?
I won't put them on the spot, but I think, it's hard to be just one of those. I think I have a little bit of all of them. I would hope to be the purposeful approach more often than not, but sometimes hands off, especially the part about being jealous of school boards that only meet for 15 minutes. I was like, gosh, I wish I had some of those meetings. I can't lie.
No. She said no.
Now we have a joke with Ms. Jordan and I about how long our meetings go and why, but it's a good reason. We answer questions. But anyway, yeah, I'd be interested in hearing from you if you feel like I'm in one area or another more than not.
Yeah, now that's how you think you are. Now, what do they think your governance style is? Do tell.
I've known Bernie for over 10 years, and just when I was reading those, my eyes immediately went down to purposeful, because we all have a lot of ideas and we have goals in mind and whatnot, but I always remember that Bernie does take that step back and look at I think I look at a big picture, but Bernie's picture is a lot bigger than mine. And so I definitely see that thoughtfulness that Bernie puts behind his work. And definitely, like I said, we've done a lot of work focusing on what is our purpose and clarifying that and learning to not micromanage. And that's been a process for us.
Yeah, I like that. Learning not to micromanage. Yeah. I have some boards here who admit, we do try to micromanage. But then I say, well, I'm glad that you're telling on yourself, because then it's okay for the superintendent. I'm giving the superintendent permission to say, you're a little bit in my lane and I got it. When he says I have it, believe him. Because there is a tendency, depending on what's going on, for board members to think that they need to help the superintendent do it. But it can be viewed as micromanaging. So you always have to be careful with that.
Sometimes I've let the board get into the weeds and they get lost. And then like, why'd you let us do that? So you have to learn. You have to learn.
You let them get into the weeds. Wow.
Yeah, some decisions. I mean, they
Some
push,
decisions.
instead of saying, I've got it, I say, okay, we'll do it that way. And then 5 hours later, they're like, what? You know,
Okay.
why don't you just make the decision?
Yeah.
That's usually how it ends.
And just remembering, superintendents teach up to the board. That's what his responsibility is, to educate you on the education landscape of this district. I never, ever say board members are not educated. Never, ever say that. What I am saying is that he is the education expert in this position and you guys are governing. So allow him to teach up so that you in turn can share, because you're the conduit between the district and the community, to let them know. But the superintendent teaches up to the board. Superintendent doesn't tell the board what to do. You teach up to the board, and so that you really understand what's going on. Because remember, he's the boots on the ground. He knows all the things, all the moving parts. So what about you, Andrea? What do you think about your superintendent's governance style?
So even though Shaquille just got recently reelected, I still feel like I'm the newest member
Okay.
on the board.
Okay.
And so I've been working with Bernie for a year and, a couple months now. And I would say purposeful approach is what I saw. I actually went back and forth between what we were chapter 4 because of new trustee orientation. And I would say that when I went to orientation with CSBA, no one had the same experience that I had. I was reached out to before it was even official. I had, meetings before every board meeting, explaining to me what the agenda was, letting me ask all the questions that I had. Very thoughtful, very analytical. I was very appreciative of it because honestly, I felt like I was drinking from a fire hose.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And even to some extent now, I still feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose. So I will say definitely purposeful approach. I can't even hands-off approach. I don't even see any of that. And again, I've only been on the board for a short amount of time. And so that's what I've experienced at least.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you had a good experience, because that's not necessarily the norm. So it's really, really good to hear that, to get you up to speed as much as you can. So, when you read in chapter 4, that's, yes, you're new, but the district does not stop running because they're new board members. The business is still going, the ball's rolling, and so you have to get up to speed. And so it is so helpful when there is some type of orientation, onboarding, and you have a handbook that you can read. And so that when you're listening to all these decisions that are being made, you're listening more than talking, right? So that you can start connecting the dots. Then you have those aha moments on, now I understand why they make the decision on this, and the conversation was going. And so, but yeah, even less than 2 years, you're still kind of new. Still trying to figure it out, especially the last 2 years, what we've gone through. That wasn't the norm, it got kind of derailed a little bit, but the expectation was to still govern at the highest level, right? What about you, Clay?
I'll agree with everybody else. Purposeful approach. I think, especially even for example, talking to our superintendent about just organizing our board meetings, trying to figure out sort of how be the most supportive of board members who might have questions in advance, so that we give enough time for questions in a presentation, make sure that we devote enough, at least have enough information, or at least understand what questions might come up in advance so that we can actually prepare for that, I think is definitely very helpful, especially when it comes down to sometimes top topics like for the last few years, COVID, and sort of how it affects our schools, and sort of figure out how best to present that to board members so that we can actually be informed, but also make an informed decision. So I'd say in many ways, that's definitely helpful. And like the other two, so in terms of hands-off approach and preemptive damage control approach, I'd say our soup, I think he does a very good job in at least keeping us in the loop, especially when it comes down to, say, complaints from teachers or staff, or something that might become a bigger issue. I think just giving us a heads up, even if it's just by an email or a quick call, I think definitely gives us a sense of relief, especially when it comes down to other boards and other school districts across California where you hear there's such huge contentions and in the
Right.
point where it's like those gotcha games where you're trying to make the superintendent look bad on purpose. And in the process, it sort of like defeats or destroys some of those kind of governance team bonds that I think makes boards a lot more effective. So yeah, so I'd say our soup does a good job at least making sure that that stuff doesn't happen and at least ensures that we actually are sort of ready to go and sort of like have the most information we need to actually do our job.
I can't see a superintendent lasting very long when they're trying to keep the board in the dark. You know, you just don't do that because just the structure in itself, it's like you answer to the Board of Education. And what are you gaining by keeping the board in the dark? Because you guys have to make informed decision. And if you don't know something and you make decisions that can negatively impact then the accountability, you're going to look at your superintendent if you have information that you didn't share. So you don't ever want to do that. I think all superintendents are working toward being as purposeful as possible because you are a team. And you don't want that tension between the Board of Education and the superintendent, which does happen all over the country. But you can see pretty much how the district is being operated and what the culture of the district is when there's tension between a board and the superintendent. That is your only employer, so your only employee, so you want to give him all the tools he needs to be successful, and then holding him accountable. You know, that's what the board should be doing with the superintendent. Go ahead, Bernie.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, the other side of the coin is that I also have a board that tries not to micromanage and is not a very needy board. I speak to superintendents who have very needy board members and more than one sometimes, and that's all they do all day, 5 days a week, is the feeding and caring for their neediest board members and taking care of their minor issues for them. And that's very distracting that I have not had to deal with. I've appreciated that the board is provides direction to the superintendent and staff. And if there are issues that they have, that they bring it up and we can discuss and we can address them at a board meeting. I've learned over the years that I need, the beginning when Shaquille first met me, if a board member made a comment or a suggestion, and I was like, okay, let's do that, But over the years, it's like, okay, well, let's bring that up to the full board to discuss and see if that's the direction that the board wants to give me or to my staff. When a board member says, I need this and I need this, and I want this. And it's like, okay, let's have a discussion in public.
Yeah.
If the full board thinks that that's a good idea, I'd be happy to do that. But one person cannot tell me what to do.
Right. And I'm glad that you feel comfortable telling a board that. Some superintendents don't, but I encourage them to
That's
do
why
that.
I say when I was young
Well,
and new,
Yeah.
and now I'm old.
yeah. But it's really good that you really do feel comfortable saying that because, it helps the boards understanding their role because you're right. You are one voice and one vote. The board does not have any power once that gavel is hit and you disperse. You are a board member. You are not the Board of Education. So all of the directives to the superintendent and staff comes when you are collectively together. And so that's good. Bring it to the board. I always like to say, what's the will of the board? It's not just one board member, but you may have, it's not here, but it happens where the superintendent is spending 20-30% of his time catering to the board. And so if he's spending that much time, then he cannot be getting his work done. Right. And so the board wants to just make sure, and you have your own jobs or life outside of this, but why would any board want to do the superintendent's job if you hired that person to do it? And holding them accountable, because when evaluation time comes around, you have to be able to evaluate him fairly to say, did he meet these criteria of what we said we wanted to do so that we're moving forward. And that's what you'll be thinking about when we, again, going into the equity work. There are going to be some benchmarks that must be met. but having the conversations is like, well, I'm gonna wave a flag here because we may not be able to do this. We don't have the capacity. Well, unless they're, gotta look at the budget. Can we do this? We have human capital here. All of those type of conversations that you should be having with the superintendent so that he can do the work. You know, I tell board members when COVID hit, and of course it's still here, but you should be glad you weren't sitting in that seat because he has to figure out what to do and present it to the board. And then you have the discussion. It kind of got flipped around in some areas where the board felt that they had to tell the superintendent how to do this. How many, you know, the remote learning, how many Chromebooks to get, that is all there. And so I'm really pleased to see how you guys are modeling this behavior, which is what a good an effective team looks like. And that's the key. Because you always, at the end, you know, you guys are working together. You want to always say, what will be our legacy? What are we putting in place? What are we shoring up? The foundation that is like that iceberg underneath. People can't see it, but you are shoring, after coming out of this hole the last 2 years, the foundation has been shaken. So you're just shoring it up and just making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do as a governing body so that he can be successful in doing what he needs to do. So that's the key of the board working together. And so I just want you to look at these quickly. I had pre-assigned you, but if you could just kind of look over whichever one that's assigned to you and just see if you can see some characteristics in these superintendents that you think you may see the same in your superintendent, or you think it may be a good idea, some positiveness on how to really work with the board closely. Perhaps if you read some of them already, there were some ideas in here that really resonated with you. The superintendent, I'm going to give you 62, page 62. Just give you about 2 minutes to look at unless you have it already highlighted. You ready? Okay. All right, go ahead. Do share.
So I actually remember reading this one, and so I'm going to actually say what I see and what I'd like to see.
Okay, all right. All right, superintendent. Remember, superintendent, you were in that hot seat? So now they're going to tell you. So here you go.
It's funny, we had not a board, well, I guess a board retreat earlier in the year, and it was really helpful to just to do a deep dive, to get together, to outside of us making decisions. And so number one, I think that's important. He makes sure to schedule that on a yearly basis. The fact that we're even doing this right here, and this is a learning session, this is a deep dive for us. And so I would see those are the similarities that I see. He's also a long tenured superintendent. Obviously, none of us on the board hired him. I would say very lucky to have that, because again, he's learned from, he said it, his youth, and now he's taken that knowledge and helped us become better board members. And so I would say that's been great. I do also feel like there's a lot of trust and respect within the culture of our team. And I think he sets the tone for that. And I kind of alluded to that with how I was onboarded into the team and making sure that I had the interactions with the board members, with the superintendent, actually with some of the administration, which I think it's obviously important for the success of not only the board, but also, the superintendent. What I would like to see
Okay, so now that you're saying that, I want you to look at your superintendent. Talk to him.
What I would like to see is more of these I know this is a session really focused on equity, but the session that we did earlier in the year, the retreats, the deep dives, to really do things outside of just coming and looking at the policies and figuring out ways that we can connect and to be more innovative, even though we do have these restrictions based on funds and based on policies that are already in place. And I recently went to the CSBA training on student learning and judicial review. And there were so many things that I got out of that I'm like, oh my God, I am not doing this. And again, I can come and talk to you about it, but having the rest of the team there because we are one board, being able to do that and not wait once a year to do that deep dive with Luann, I just think would be really helpful.
Do you receive that, Superintendent? You do. Okay. Thank you.
Phone calls.
So what about Clayton? You ready to go next?
Yeah, I can go next. So for mine was Garden Growth Unified. I think some of the things that I liked, especially in sort of the story that was talked here, was she made it clear that her major factor into success was attributed to a purposeful, high, proactive relationship with the board, talking about how she would make sure that she did everything she could to sort of kind of tout the successes of the board in terms of policies that they wanted to lead by, but also make sure that they were given sort of their due, especially when it came down to sort of being the leaders on those kind of innovative ideas, which I think is especially something nice for a board member. She also mentioned that she was trying to be honest, straightforward, and purposeful at the same time, making sure that her approach to leading as a superintendent was always out in front rather than just being hidden behind the scenes, which I think personally is kind of a nice attribute for a superintendent. Yeah.
All right, great. All right.
Yeah, that's all I have. Yeah.
So Shaquille, what about you?
Yes, so when I read about this superintendent and school district and all the gains that they made for academic achievement in their district, what stood out to me was that they said there was a timely two-way communication, that they were cultivating a hopeful vision, and that they were focused on values. And then one thing that caught my eye was when it mentioned that they had a 1-hour work session scheduled before each board meeting, where they were going over their 6 strategic goals. So I thought that was pretty interesting, similar to what Trustee Jordan is saying. I think that over the years, one thing that I would have liked to see more of is study sessions. But a lot of times the way our board works, if 2 people care enough about something, we kind of get together and say, hey, we should have a study session or, special board meeting or whatever. So I don't put that responsibility only on the superintendent, but also on my colleagues and I, that if we care about something enough or we need more information and we want the public to know more, we can always call for a special board meeting.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. And later in the book, we'll, talk about what study sessions, the board can determine at any point when you want to have a study session, because if it's a topic that you need to have a deep dive into, set aside the time and they're open to the public, but it really gives the community an opportunity to see the work getting done, to hear more, because by the time you get to the board table, most of the work is already done. The discussion has been had. You're just handling the business once you get to the board table. So don't hesitate to schedule study sessions on topics because if you're at the board table and you're continuing to have these in-depth discussions, and if it's not time sensitive, it probably needs to be pulled from the agenda, because you're not all you're saying is you're not ready to take any action, as long as it's not time sensitive. And so that's where, board president making sure that you kind of see if the conversation, people aren't getting to a point where they can even be, on the same page with it. So think about that would be a good topic for a study session. And you'll know that there are things that are on the agenda, like just to say it's budget. It's usually always a big thing. Do you schedule time to really do a deep dive before you have to make a decision or vote on your budget? And so utilize a study session like that. Usually they're no more than 2 hours. One topic that you need to, really dig deep into, make sure the superintendent brings a staff person who can tell you everything you need to know about it, and you guys just be very clear on the what do you want to know, so that they don't just come in and just share everything, but there are certain specific things that you want to learn about. Yeah, well, go ahead, Shaquille, you were
Yeah,
saying
what was interesting to me was that those 1 hour sessions were all based on, I guess, one of the 6 strategic goals.
Yes.
I thought that was interesting because I don't think we've ever had a special board meeting where we only focus on one of our strategic goals. So that was something new to me.
And you know whose board meetings whose are they? They're yours. So you can determine that, absolutely. So now you've said that twice already in the last 2 minutes, so it's important. Clayton, are you writing it down? Don't forget.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, I see. Because he done said it twice in 2 minutes. So, okay, awesome. I love to hear that. Absolutely. Superintendent, what did you pick up on the superintendent on 660?
So I have the Sanger Unified School District, and I've actually met Mr. Johnson a couple times. And I didn't know all this about him. I think he was really big
Interesting. Yeah.
around the academic turnaround that he accomplished in his school district. And so he presented at a lot of conferences and held conferences and had visits in the Sanger Unified School District. But what I took away from him is just the advice to never try and hide from the board. A superintendent should never try to fake their way through a problem, and just being honest, never lie, either by misinformation or by omission, and it's just easier. I mean, my philosophy is it's easier to tell the truth when you never lie, because you don't have to remember what you lied about. So if I just tell the truth and I'm just honest, then it's just better.
Yeah.
You don't have to cover yourself anywhere.
Exactly. And in order for the board to make decisions, you have to know the good, bad, and the ugly. And you don't want the community to be surprised when you have to make some tough decisions and they've never been made aware that you were in a situation. So you just have to present it. And so I know many boards don't want to talk about the bad, but when you have to, always make sure, but this is the plan to address it. It may take time, but always have a plan to address it so that you're not putting your head in the sand as if it's just going to go away. Okay. So thank you for going through that process. I'm just going to talk about this for 2 minutes and I want to turn it over. The new board member, section in this book was really, it talked about what boards should do. And I have you guys lovely pictures up there. How about that? It really was going to pop in one at a time, but this isn't my computer, but that's okay. I just love to use those animations. But the key thing is making sure that, help new board members feel welcome. Those meetings, and Andrea, you mentioned that you were very prepared, which is so important. You should reach out to one another. I know COVID hindered us from people just going out eating together and all that, but hopefully we can start back doing that. But just have conversations with each other that doesn't necessarily have to do with anything about the board business. Building relationships outside of being and sitting at the dais is so helpful. Because again, when you have to make these tough decisions, if I understand who Shaquille is, that I will know when he digs his heel in the sand on a topic, then I understand it better because I got to know him outside of just the board business. Yeah. Go ahead, Andrea, you want to say something?
No, I was going to agree with that, and I was going to go back to Superintendent Vidala's his reading. There, I believe the superintendent had dinners before the board meetings. And I know the first time that I actually shared a meal with the board was at the annual education conference. And it was so amazing to do that and to have a conversation that wasn't focused on, taking action. And it was like, well, how can we be better? How can we work together? And, showing me the ropes, being that was my first, conference. And not to add another thing, but I would love to, in the Bay Area, for us to do something like that. And it doesn't have to be as formal. It was just, again, to interact outside of us taking action. It just seems like it will help with the culture of our team, regardless of if we're a veteran team or a new team member coming in. So
Absolutely. Go ahead, Clayton.
I was going to say SMCSBA has a dinner next Monday with
I saw
other
that.
board members across San Mateo County. So it is education specific,
Yes.
but I feel like in that kind of setting, it's nice just to see some people from CSBA conference again and just talk in a more casual setting as well.
Yep.
Yeah, I registered for that. I didn't get a notification about it though.
I haven't either.
Yeah, so I was gonna. I'm glad you brought it up.
I can forward it
paid
because I
already,
helped
too.
improve that email, so I can forward it back over.
Yeah, and what some boards do, they have a meal together before board meetings. If it's 30 minutes before, you're not talking about board business, you just, when you break bread, you're in a whole different space. And so that could be, and I don't know how your lives are before you get to the board meeting. If you just can barely, you're like, no. And so you'll find different things that
Yeah.
you can do so that if it's a few minutes afterwards where you just have a cup of coffee with each other, just kind of unwind, just think of something to do. And then quickly, your first 100 days, just remember you suspend all those preconceived notions about the district, the staff, you get up to speed, be mindful of the confidentiality, avoid conflicting interests, accept the realities of governance is already a structure. And I tell board members, you can't come in and change it just because you don't like it. It's almost going to, being on the basketball team and you don't like the rules. What is the coach going to tell you to do? And probably not a very nice way, So there's a structure, a governing structure. So perhaps, it gives the board members a chance to think about, is this a good fit for me? Because you can still advocate, but maybe you should do that on the other side of the table. But so you just have to really understand what the parameters are and to govern. So that's the quick and dirty there. And just remembering, May 17th is our next one, and then we'll have chapters 5 and 6.
I just wanted to speak back to what the board should do. And
Sure.
so I was onboarded during a pandemic. And so arranged school site visits and classroom walkthroughs, I actually never had the chance to do that. And so now that things are opening back up, I know I was on the PTA at 3 different schools in our district, but I know that things have changed, staff has changed. And so I do think at this point, like reading that and based on the training that I had recently,
Yeah.
it's on my list to say that's something that I think I should be doing. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, so Nicole, I know that we have a
Well, should we take a little break, you think?
5-minute break.
Cool.
We can do that. Have a stretch break.
Turn off your mics.
All right. Y'all doing okay? Is that loud enough? Sound okay? All right, cool. So just really excited about the work you just did in the book study. And it's always just like touching to have an opportunity to hear you all reflect and have candid conversations with each other, be reflective, because again, this is the kind of foundation for how do we do equity work. And I keep saying this, and sustain it, right? So that it lasts. As Deborah and I were just talking about just the experience of boards and how we hate that more boards don't have opportunities to do what y'all are doing. Because this is a sacred time for you to build your own capacity and kind of prepare for what comes, which is the challenges, right? Like there's no way to avoid the pushback and the challenges of equity work, because as we've talked before, the education system wasn't designed to be equitable. Policies weren't designed to be equitable. That's the history of public education. So with that being said, what you're trying to do is you're trying to do school very different. And so with any type of change, as you know, there's resistance, and there's also, the mindset that aren't necessarily there and ready to move forward. So how do we prepare ourselves for that? Right. And part of it is what you did, what you've been doing is just continuously focusing on effective governance, making sure there's a culture for us to operate at high levels of effectiveness. That way, when it's time for the storms to come, we're ready. Right? We stay focused on that unity of purpose, right? We stay focused on the leadership style of a purposeful superintendent. We stay focused on those priorities that show up in our, not only our strategic plan, but as a board, what is our priorities? So one of your priorities that you've clearly illustrated since last year is equity. So what we pushed you to do is to create an equity statement. And the whole, again, point of that was to have common language that you all can identify when we say equity. We can explain it, right? We can apply it as a lens to all governance work. And so remember, we had walked you through that process. And in our last session, we got a chance to look at your draft number, I think it's 3. I've kind of lost track. I think it's 3. And you all looked at it and just kind of gave yourself a little bit of feedback. I know that Bernie, you shared like some stakeholder feedback that you got from your adults, your teachers, and some of the classified folks. And also Shaquille, who was not necessarily new to the board, but new to the process, right? Because we had started this before you came back on. You gave some really good feedback and just food for thought about, what are some of the strengths, right? What are some of the things that really are supporting this? And then also what are some areas to think about? Really good questions. And so what I thought today would be is just an opportunity for y'all to revisit it. Always knowing that it's never going to be perfect because you're going to get feedback continuously. But I want you all to get to a point where we would like to say that by the end of our last session we're together, which we'll talk about maybe some dates, and basically your early summer, that you feel like, you know what, we can adopt our statement and we'll embed it into our equity policy and feel like, okay, let's put a pin in it and let's really start to apply it. Because that's the most important thing, is once it's done, then you want to be able to apply it. So I wanted to just take a few moments to look at your equity statement. I'm going to ask us to do 2 things. One is let's just look at it again and see if there are any adjustments we'd like to make based on the feedback. So if you start on page 3, it actually overlaps into page 4. So I apologize because that doesn't help for us visual folks. So you have to do like me and hold them up together, page 3 and 4. But you'll see your first part of your statement, and then you'll see the second piece where you talk about what it actually entails, what the work includes. And then behind that, you'll see your feedback from our last session. Okay, and so I want to ask you all, based on what you see, what kind of revisions might you make? And then we're going to do a quick 30-second elevator speech activity. So I'm going to give you, 3-4 minutes. Well, that's not good. That's my college daughter who strategically calls me in the middle of presentations all the time. It's amazing. I'm just like, it's part of the territory. It's part of my presentation, I think. I tried. The good news is she calls, we talk every day, so it's nice. She's all the way in Atlanta at HBCU, so we miss our baby girl, but strategically always calls right in the middle of a presentation. I don't know how it happened. It's Clark, Atlanta. Really? Oh, we'll have to talk. But that's where she's at. Go Panthers. All right, so I'll give you about 3 or 4 minutes. Just take a look and, oh, really? Oh, yeah, we definitely got to talk. This would be inspirational. Okay. That's a good point, because she's only a freshman, so. So let's go like 4 or 5 minutes. Let's do that. And just take a look at it really deeply and think about, are there any edits or things that you feel like we need to still massage a little bit? Okay. Knowing we're not going to start from scratch, but just any edits, massaging you may want to do. So I'll give you about 4 or 5 minutes. All right, how we doing? Maybe a few more minutes? Okay. All right, my friends. So let's go ahead and open up for a little discussion. And as things come up, let's just see where we go. And so again, what we're going to do is just kind of revisit our equity statement. Remembering the purpose of it, again, was to have like a high level lens on your entire district. So your statement should apply to everything. It shouldn't be too narrowly focused. We should be able to measure its impact, right? So can we measure, did we get there or are we getting there? Is it focused on kids? That's always important. And is it aligned with the work you're doing across the district, right? Or is it kind of an abstract idea that just doesn't align with anything, right? And that's really important that it has alignment, which creates that common understanding of what it is. So I'm going to open it up and see what kind of discussion we have and take notes and hear your thoughts. Who wants to jump in first? Thanks, Andrea. You Panther, you former Panther, you. Why don't you start us off?
Always a Panther. So I guess because I wasn't here last time, and I'm seeing I guess I have some questions.
Okay.
So one of the areas for growth on here says we recommend to be more specific. Is that specific to the bullet points? Is that specific to the actual statement itself? What, like, I guess I need some clarification on that.
Yeah, good question. So the notes you see here was based on the whole board's discussion. And honestly, I don't remember specifically who said what, but I do remember, Shaquille, you had a lot of good feedback, primarily because you had not seen it ever, right? And he wasn't a part of the initial discussion. So I think he provided a lot more context or questions. So I don't know, Shaquille, if that was one that you mentioned about being specific. Do you remember?
I'm not sure, but
Okay.
I think it was. It might be related to if we're gonna say that we're gonna do something. I think I was saying that we need to know how. So, like for instance, if we're
Got
gonna
it.
interrupt,
Yep.
because as Nicole said, the whole public school system itself
Right.
needs to be interrupted. So it just made me ask a lot of questions like,
Got it.
well, what are we really saying and how are we really going to do that?
Got it. And it comes back to mind too, as we talked a little bit, and this is what today's purpose is some of the things you're going to say as recommendations will say, that shows up in your equity policy. And what you just said is the how, right? So when I think of specifics, right? Well, what does that look like? How is that going to, what are the actions going to look like? Because this should be broad on purpose. But your policy is where you actually can call out some of those clear, specific actions in terms of the how. And obviously the administrative regulations really share more of the how, right? You're more of the what it is, right? The vision for it, kind of the big picture how of the board. And then you have the admin regulations, which is more of what the superintendent takes this direction, right, from the policy, and then implementation happens. And that's where a lot of the how happens as well. So good question.
And I asked that because to be more specific in any of these things, it would be adding more words.
Right.
And then I think it said that and then Shaquille, you had wrote, too many words creates a loss of essence.
Yep.
And then you said bullet points. So I'm like, okay, now we can't be more specific if we're trying to have less words.
Yep.
So I just wanted to clarify that first.
Yep.
So I think the other thing that stands out to me is that we need to have it in layman's language, which I think was mentioned before, right? And so when I see, ensuring that each student has available pathways to success, does everyone understand what available pathways to success
Right.
means? And does it mean something different for everyone?
Right.
And so if it's going to mean something, if someone's going to read this and take a different interpretation, then we need to be more specific, but in a
Yep.
clarifying way, if that makes sense.
Yep. Good point.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and here's the part that you all are going to struggle with in this whole process is because you're at the board, you're going to use I don't want to use the word high level, but you're going to use a level of language that's based on governance, right? And so that may not make sense to a second grader. So this is where we do talk about how do you create a student-friendly version of this? And, just to fast forward, one of the next steps would be just that, is let kids give feedback, right? You do have to set a little bit of context first, because what they see as equity could be a very simple word like fair. And this doesn't say fair. This says some other, like a lot of deeper work, right? But what does a pathway look like? So one of the things we say is have like a student-friendly version. It could be a few words, or it could be an image, which I think is a really cool way of doing it, is having kids actually like give an image. Maybe it's an art contest. I mean, there's so many ways you can do it, but that to me is the simplified version, which you could use with parents, right? Think about like, this is not interpreted in any languages except English, right? We don't talk about that as well, but it's more starting with you, because you do need to keep it in your language for the purpose of like, this is the level you're at, right? But you do want it to be common and you want it to be clear. So what you're sharing is kind of that struggle. Go ahead. Do you have a thought?
No, I would add
yeah.
to what Ms. Jordan said, if we're thinking about translating this, we need to make sure that it's free from idiomatic expressions. Like pathways to success is if you think about literally translating that, it can come up like streets, that lead to,
Walkways or
fortunes or something like that.
steps, yeah.
So pathways to success is sort of an idiomatic expression. We understand it.
Yeah.
But what do we mean when we say that?
Yep.
So we think about, as you look at this,
Got it.
those phrases that Google Translate's going to put into another language.
Yep.
How do we make it so that the meaning is preserved?
Right.
We don't end up on a, the golden paved road to,
Yep.
a wonderful future. Or
So
something.
like, huh? Yeah. Do you have a thought?
No, because I don't want to move ahead because I saw something about the elevator speech.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll get to that for sure.
But I guess you're reading my mind, because just what keeps coming to my mind is that I still remember the motto of my high school, even though I didn't necessarily have the greatest experience.
Remember the motto.
But the motto was where everybody is somebody. And that's simple, but it covers, I mean, that's equity right there, right? Where everybody is somebody. And I'm pretty sure everyone remembers that motto from our school, because we used to talk about it all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the reality is you think about what it took for you to remember that, right? Is there was a lot of repetition of it. It was a lot of focusing on it. And that is a great example of what this statement should be, is that you all should feel like it is something that's at the forefront of everything you do. And when I, fast forward to the elevator speech, right, is that you need to be able to say this in 30 seconds or less, right? Because sometimes you don't have time to go through and explain what does pathway to success mean. And so remember, that is also the simplified version, right? Because as a board, you're in the community, you may be, advocating for, a grant. I mean, it could be anything, right? And you need to be able to say, this is the wording around what equity means to us. Think about also being able to articulate this to someone who not necessarily doesn't understand what it says. They understand clearly, but they don't believe in it. That's a whole nother space. And so this is why we talk about let's make meaning of this. And this is why we spend so much time on this too, to make sure once you adopt it, you feel like this is what we mean. But yes, we know the work after an equity statement is to spend time educating people. So if we just said, you know what, we're going to take pathways to success. We might not take it out of here, but we know we'll have to unpack that with people, because I understand what this means. But remember, back to our very first article, remember the water system change, and we talked about mental models? Pathway to success is not part of the history of my public education experience. So even though I believe it, but now in action, I have to put this in action, I may have a disconnect. So learning about it, this may be a whole professional development workshop you'll have to focus on. The concept of access to appropriate and quality resources. Well, we'd have to unpack what that means. But again, it's high level because this applies to all aspects of your district. No matter who students are, no matter if it's about student nutrition, transportation, right? A bus driver needs to understand what this means in the context of driving the bus, right? Your folks who supervise at your school, was it noon duty supervisors, campus supervisors, they need to understand what this means. So that simplified version sometimes comes in the context of discussion, right? But also understanding you may just need like a one sentence, right? Or a picture, or even, I didn't queue it up for today, but one county office we're working with, because they're creating their own equity statement. And the example I used was Alameda County Office of Education. And their mission and vision statement, in my mind, is an equity statement because it's very centered on social justice and it's really kind of connects to the work that they're doing around equity. They created a video, which I think is a cool thing. And I think that I hyperlinked it in here, but I actually played it today and the hyperlink is the wrong link. So I'll update that so you have the right link. But it's on their webpage, but it's not as easy to find as you think. But it's really cool. It's about a minute long. And what they did is they took numerous staff members around the county office and they all basically read the mission vision statement. So it was like a collective video of everybody who worked within the county. Y'all could do the same thing here with kids, with teachers, with parents, right? There's your equity statement. So the goal is you have common, clear language that everyone understands and can apply it to any aspect of the district. So that's the ways you can simplify it, even though this is a very high level and pretty deep definition. The part that I think might help is that if you just looked only at the first paragraph and said, this is our statement, and obviously the bullet points kind of talk more in detail about the actions, this might be a really good way for you as a team to just really focus on, okay, my 30-second elevator speech, I'm really focused on this first paragraph, which is pretty easy to remember. Kind of. You have to look at it a few times. It's longer than your motto from high school. But that 30-second elevator speech, you want to really be able to explain this and you as a board feel comfortable. That's going to be really important. So this is why we say take some time, look at it, make sure it really exemplifies what your beliefs are, what your core values are, what you believe equity is. And remember, this all started with individually, everyone giving their first word, right? Remember we talked about, give me a word that describes equity. And that was based on individuals. And then we collectively put those words together in the discussion and created this structure to begin to be this statement. So other thoughts about the statement in itself before we go to your 30-second elevator speech?
You know, I was going to say, you mentioned student-friendly version.
Yep.
When I was reading this again, I do remember when we created this statement, and it all made sense when we talked about it then. I say that because I was talking to somebody that I was going to an equity meeting tonight, and they didn't understand what equity was still. And I'm sure that if they thought that way, I'm sure a lot of people probably don't get it here.
Yep.
And I was just thinking too, like if a 12-year-old student read this statement, I don't think they'll understand any of it. So I don't know if there's an easy way for us, like even just make it as a friendly to understand version, because this would probably be like a college level kind of explanation, which I think might be a little bit too tough even for like, say, even some of our parents who may not speak English as a first language. Even if we did translate it simply, it might still go over the head, which I think might become a problem if we do something. Yeah, I don't know if there's a easy way to simplify it, but I would say if there is anything we should simplify, it's definitely the bullet points. I think when I was just trying to read it again, all the phrases to me, I remember why we included them. Is it too much for some people to understand? Maybe. So I'll say, if anything, just simplifying that would definitely be a good help. I think the first paragraph alone is probably hopefully as simple as it could be. It could probably be even simpler, but if we can like nail that first paragraph, I think the rest would probably be much simpler for everybody to understand too.
Got it. So here's what I would suggest based on the feedback you shared is part of your, I would say, a good homework assignment for you, although you have your governance core, reading, is to actually take this statement and actually bring back like a one sentence definition that you would say really exemplifies this. Give your student friendly, parent friendly, simplified version and bring that back to our next session. And I think and I'll actually kind of do a version for you as well, just to give another, maybe idea about it. And then that way we'll see how you feel as far as, how this looks. Because again, you are an elementary district, so we get it, right? Like it can't be something that people don't understand. But again, as a board, this is still your language and you don't have to have permission. I'll give you an example, looking at your equity policy. Like, are people going to understand that? Do they understand any of the policies
Look, yeah,
you have?
any of the policies, honestly.
Jump in, Bernie.
Yeah, no, I think I was going to just say the same thing. Like all of our policies are written
Right.
in a language register that is
Yep.
a little bit higher than certainly how we speak.
Yep.
So I think, but it depends on how we want to use this, right? One of the themes that came up in the feedback, and again, this is coming from the frontline individuals in our school district staff. There was a sense of defensiveness, like of feeling judged because we weren't providing this, or because they felt like they, and it always comes up. You use the word bias, and suddenly everybody's woo, everybody hackles go up. But we just realize we all have a bias. We just need to examine them and know how to protect others against
Absolutely.
them.
Yep.
But
Good point.
one of the thoughts I had, that term that I think the board really loved and liked, the intentionally interrupting systems.
Yep.
I remember spending quite a bit of time on it and settling that that's what we mean. That's what we
exactly
want. I think it comes across a little bit sort of revolutionary to some people, and I don't want to apologize for that. I mean, I think it is a revolutionary idea to stop doing things the way that we've always done it because it's harmful. That's essentially what we're saying.
Yep.
I wondered if the board might consider, with those three, starting with the result, because it goes, it's action and then results. But if we start with our goal and our result, and then refer to the action secondarily, I wonder if it changes how it comes across. I don't know if it does, and I don't know if we want to, but say if the first one might say something like, create policies and practices that are fair for all students, intentionally interrupt systems that have harmed underserved student groups. Like if we switched it and you focused on what the positive action is, and then what you're trying to undo or trying to take apart, it may change the tone.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I think, at least, in college, what I learned was, or when you're having professional conversations, you never want to end on a negative tone, right? And so I think when we were doing this, we did it that way. And so I do agree with you that I could see how it could be triggering. However, we're not going to please everybody in this process. And people, I think Ms. Anderson said this best, this is going to be uncomfortable and people are going to feel targeted, even though if we're not targeting people, because the goal of this is to be broad and it's to help our district move forward. And so, I'm open to trying it if my fellow board trustees are trying it, but I do not agree with removing that language at all, because the reality is that we need to interrupt these systems. They have stifled us for so long, and if we have this mindset of we need to please others just to keep the peace, then we're never going to move forward. So
yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think it's worth the board having that conversation to say, yes, we like this phrase and we want to lead with it, understanding that it will trigger, but being prepared. Certainly, I need to be prepared, and I need to prepare our principals and administrators. This could be a result of reviewing this with your different groups, and here's how we need to respond. Exactly what Ms. Jordan said. We need to actively deconstruct things that have been built to hold people back.
Absolutely. Well, and I think this will help you all. If you notice in the next steps, this is why we call them next steps, is once that statement is eventually developed, you're still going to always have that non-closure, right? You're not going to have it perfect. It's always going to be triggering to somebody. But this is why we say don't do this in isolation. You want to make sure there's some learning and education around what equity is. And this is professional development. Like that's what has to be coupled with this. And that's why we call it comprehensive work. So when you think about like, how do we, like, what does it mean to interrupt inequitable practices or to examine biases? Like, I need to know what that means. So to be fair to our staff who may be triggered and may like rightfully feel like I'm being attacked, what's missing is the absence of information. So this is why professional learning, which boards have, a real influence on, you allocate budgets all the time. You look at how do we build capacity from that kind of governance space to say, yes, we want to make sure our staff is supported in this. So we always say support first, then hold people accountable, right? And that takes time. And part of what you got to experience is even asking people for feedback. You saw some of their triggering behavior or feelings they have. So one of the pieces of next steps is you got to do some training, right? And the training typically is like that's what we actually spend a lot of our time doing is we do training of our leaders in particular, where we start with leaders so they understand this language. There's a lot of language in here that people don't understand. And so I think that's going to be one of your next steps is to make sure that you give people the time to wrestle with this and in a safe environment, right? It was going to be uncomfortable, but it needs to be safe so that no one feels blamed or shamed or feels like they're being attacked. Like that is really important. But with it at face value, if I don't have any explanation of this, so this kind of goes to the 30-second elevator speech, right? Is how do you express this very quickly for folks, because at the board level, you don't have a lot of time, right? But also, what is your talking point basically around this work? So what I want to do is spend about 5 minutes, and then I want to close with just how your policy is going to really drive your next steps. And then we're going to actually do some scenario work with your policy. We're going to continue to try to unpack that. So again, by the time we're finished with the work with you, that you feel like we can amend, because you've already adopted your policy. So you have an equity policy, right? So we're not having you create it from scratch. You have one, but it's more about bringing it to life. And then how do we apply it? So that's going to be a really important piece of your next, really your 2 sessions. This statement, though, we wanted to make sure you feel good about. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you about a minute. If you need to take notes, do whatever you need to do, but I need to hear from you, your 30-second elevator speech to help me understand what equity means in Jefferson Elementary School District. So I'm gonna give you about a minute to just write down some notes. And then you're gonna just go ahead and share, and I'll tell you how that will work. How we doing? Maybe a couple more seconds. You got this. You got this. All right. Pencils down. Anxiety. No, I need more time. All right. Couple more seconds. All right. All right. So here's what we're going to do. No stress. Here's what we're going to do. Pencils down. What is that SAT thingy that they threw out? stop signs at the end of the section, right? Stop, pencils down, don't go any further. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you pair up actually, and you can just, I'm going to have you just based on proximity, just Clayton, Andrea, you'll be together. Okay. And then Shaquille and Bernie, you'll be together. Okay. So here's how it's going to work. You're each going to share your 30-second elevator speech. Okay. And then I will give you the next set of directions after that. So it'll be pretty quick. So 30 seconds is all you get. So if you want to have your own timer out, great. Y'all have a phone? Y'all have your phones with you? No? It's all right. I'm going to do my own then. Don't even worry about it. That's to be a distraction for you. Let me get my timer out. So all you have is 30 seconds. I'm sorry ahead of time because it will feel very awkward, but 30 seconds is it. So I'm going to say go for the first person. Okay. So pick who wants to go first. All right, Clayton. Clayton's going first. You got voluntold that fast. You see how Panthers act? See, I'm telling you. No. All right. Who's going first here? Okay. And Shaquille's going first. All right. So 30-second elevator speech. If you need your notes, go right ahead. Starting now.
Student equity through ensuring success. I said it. But committed to student
5 seconds.
success.
2 and 1. Stop. All right. All right. You'll have 30. Yeah, that was just Clayton's time. So you finished. Good. Shaquille, you got yours finished? All right. So we're going to flip flop. Let me reset it to a normal time. All right. So next person, Bernie and Andrea, you're going to go starting now. Because there's pretty much like it's not really much to just redo. I was gonna do this. This is based on the time.
Wanted to say that
5 seconds. All right, stop. All right. So I said stop. All right, there we go. All right, so now, do you feel convinced that you understand what equity is? Do you feel like you had ample time? You're like, no. Do you feel like you had ample time to share? Okay, so here's we're going to do it again, okay? And this time, I want you to throw your notes away. Put them away. Sorry. Sometimes people are going to catch you in the grocery store, right? You don't have your notes, right? Your phone is stuck in your back pocket, in your purse. You don't have time for the notes. All right, so we're going to do the same thing. So Clayton, going back to you, you have 30 seconds, and Shaquille, you got 30 seconds. Are you ready? Go.
we develop students' full potential, equitably providing appropriate resources. That's basically how I would say it. This is kind of hard for me because I've already developed 2 other elevators
5 seconds.
for our district. Nice to say that.
All right, time. We're going to flip flop. So Andrea and Bernie, you ready? Go. Five seconds. All right, time. All right. How do you feel? You feel like you have your 30-second elevator speech down? You only did this twice, by the way, right? A lot of times we'll do this like in a big room and do like 5 rotations, right? And the more you say it, right? Yeah, absolutely. And then did you notice you got ideas from each other? So as you talked about it, you're like, oh yeah, like that resonated, right? So you're getting ideas from each other. You get to practice saying it over and over because that's where your brain actually gets to process what this really means. But ultimately, I want to challenge y'all to do something. You have an opportunity to give your own board reports, right? And I want you to practice this. This is not part of the agenda. Remember, you have a board report, an opportunity to report out, but there's going to be opportunities for you to connect equity to whatever the topic is that you're referring to, right? So practice, like your 30-second elevator speech was 30 seconds, literally. Practice, is that something that we can actually try to utilize on the dais, right? This is where we get to share this information. Again, based on your comfort level, right? And based on kind of the context of your work. But I just want to challenge you to think about where are those places we can practice our 30-second elevator speech. Okay. And I'm not saying like the next board meeting, because you may need to process a little bit more, but you can see where your homework lies, right? It's not just about, we have the statement. Do I really feel I can speak to this statement? And that's where you may want to even do some more research about some of the words that you use in your statement. So just think about the evolution of how we'll apply this and just practice it. I said grocery store, maybe it's the bank, anywhere. I want you to think about how can we practice just sharing what equity is to us. Okay. And there's no right or wrong way, right? It was a little awkward with 30 seconds, but ultimately you got to practice. And the last time we saw you, right, we all have slept since then. So you can see how going back to this over and over is really going to help with you feeling comfortable with speaking to your statement, even in the face of, you're with your colleagues right now who you did this together with. Think about being in the face of people who don't believe in the work and giving them grace and space to question you, right? And ask legit things that you may have to really help them understand. All right. Yep.
I don't know if any other board members have done it, but I've done it several times. I was telling Bernie. This is actually hard for me because I've already had developed 2 elevator speeches.
Yep.
I've done it on the diet plenty of times because we've had very contentious times over the years. So that's when I would use it. You know?
Good point.
There would be like a crowd of people coming, you know, whatever.
Your mic, or yep. I forgot about, sorry.
In the past, I have used elevator speeches strategically on the dais, especially during those negotiation periods and that kind of stuff. So I think the first time I did it, I was a little bit nervous, but then it became a habit.
Absolutely.
I could pull out at
Good
any
point.
time. But it was never focused per se on equity. But it was an equitable statement because we always would go back to the same thing, is that we're glad that we're focused on the interests of what's in the best interest of the students.
There it is.
But now I can just add the word equity in there as well.
There you
and
go.
Some of these other concepts.
That's powerful. Well, and it speaks to what I said earlier. Your statement aligns to everything you do. It's not some separate idea, right? It ties right into your past talking points as well. So what we're going to do is continue this work in our next session, which is May 17th. I think that still works for everybody. Deborah gave you your homework assignment, and we'll reiterate it again in a follow-up email for your chapters 5 and 6. And then, of course, your simplified equity statement, right? And maybe that 30-second elevator speech may have helped you think like, oh, we can make it super simple, right? The other piece of the work that we're going to continue to do, which you actually did today, is your equity statement actually shows up in your policy. So again, you already have a policy. So I want to remind you of that. And you've already made some revisions, things that were going to be updated. But what we're going to do in our next session is take your policy and really look at how can we apply it. Okay. And when I say apply it, like how is it going to help you with making board decisions? How is it going to help you with measuring the impact of your actions? Those how, right? What are the questions you're going to ask? Remember you talked about purposeful superintendent, right? And purposeful questions, which was a good thing. How does your policy drive that? So we're going to go through and have lots of kind of tough questions for you, because ultimately, remember we said we want your policy to be your favorite toy. And it's one that doesn't go in the policy toy box with the rest of them. Which if I quizzed you now, you couldn't even answer to me how many you have in there, right? Or what they all say, right? Because we have so many. But this is the one that we keep with us at the forefront, and it's the lens by which we govern with. which is pretty powerful. So we're going to work on that for our next 2 sessions while you're still doing your governance core work. And when you're all done this summer, I feel like you all are going to feel really good about, okay, we have a great foundation, as Deborah always says. You pour that concrete, you have the foundation to sustain your work for the long run. So in closing, we don't have our dates for June. And I'm not sure if you all feel comfortable even setting that without your other colleagues here. So I'm wondering, do you have a date that maybe already falls on the governance calendar? Or do we want to maybe share a couple of dates in our check-in? Let us know how that would work
I
best.
think if you gave me 2 or 3 dates, that maybe we make that the first item of discussion on May
Okay.
17th. Like,
Sure.
give 2 or 3 dates.
Okay.
That the board can look at their own calendars.
Okay.
And then first item of business.
We'll do that first.
At
Okay.
the May 17th is to select
Yep.
the June date.
Perfect.
I think that could work.
Yep. And hopefully we'll have all 5 of you are here, right? Because remember last time we volunteered everything to Andrea, remember? We just didn't tell her what those were yet. But yeah, hopefully we'll have everybody here, and that way it'll be a really good discussion. Although it was profound, it always is great to have you all do that. But we want to make sure.
Yeah, and all our board knows that when 3 or more make a decision,
Yeah.
everyone else has to live.
And there it is, right? That's a great norm, huh? So with that, questions or comments as we close out? No? Okay. So we'll follow up again with an email with just the homework, just to make sure everybody's clear, and make sure that we come up with some dates and make sure we can have those, trying to align it when Deborah's in California, by the way. So,
And I think just a reminder to the board, one of the goals that we worked on together for myself was that once the policy statement and integrated into the policy
Yep.
is finalized, that I would work with our staff to identify at least 2 other policies that we need to change so we become in line with the
I'll put that in.
with the equity policy, so that we can begin this work unrolling in our practices.
Perfect. And you have the sample admin regs. Did I share those with you? Okay. So what we'll do is we'll put that on the agenda too, just to talk about what those might be, because we definitely want you to try to do all of them, ARs for AR's sake. But the reality is that we definitely want to make sure it aligns with the equity policy and the priorities of the board. So we don't want to have Bernie and the staff come up with, here's what we're going to do, right, and it not align. So we'll definitely add that to the conversation, because we'll just spend time on policy, not a lot on your statement, but do want to make sure we revisit the simplified version. So does that work? Okay. And samples. All right.
And thank you, everyone, for participating in your board governance.
Yay.
Look forward to the next session. And I will send you what pages in the workbook so that you'll be prepared like you were tonight. Thank you.
Oh, pages. Yep. Got it. All right.
Cool.
We're good.
Thank you so much, Deborah, Nicole. I'm sure we all appreciate you coming out tonight, and look forward to the next meeting. So other than that, I will adjourn our meeting tonight at 9:06 p.m. Have a great night, everybody.